Did you know that 38% of students fail their GCSEs every year? So if you didn't get the grades you want, you're not alone. Now you might be studying for your resits and you might not even know how to start. Not knowing how to start or where you even begin kind of feels like being trapped in a maze. All the while, that alarm clock is ticking down. But don't panic. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here with a really simple but powerful roadmap to help you out of that maze and into a really solid pass. I know this works because I've taken thousands of students through their GCSEs, and when they've revised like this, they've not only passed, but they've got better results than they expected. So, in this video, I'm going to show you, first, a really powerful but still really simple 6-day plan to ensure that you get a 97% chance of passing your exams. Second, I'm going to show you how to take full advantage of it in only 2 hours of revision a day. And third and finally, I'm going to share the big revision mistake that a lot of revision videos on this topic miss, and I'm going to show you what to do instead to make sure you ace your exams. So, let me show you exactly what this mastermind plan is. Let's be brutally honest here. When you're doing your resits, the biggest issue you're probably facing is time. It feels like there isn't enough time to go back and cover absolutely everything, which is probably causing you to stress out like mad and panic. Kind of feels like filling a bathtub with a teaspoon. There's not enough time, it's annoying, it's slow, it's tiring, and you're never going to finish in time. But here's the thing, the real issue isn't just the time, it's what you're doing with the time. Going back and trying to relearn absolutely everything is like using that teaspoon. It is not getting you anywhere fast. So imagine this instead. You're filling up that bathtub with a bucket. You're focusing on just the questions that tripped you up or the parts of the course that you really struggled with. Now you're making real progress really quickly. This is the 80-20 rule in action. You can make 80% of your results by focusing on just that 20% of the content that really matters to you. So, how do you grab that bucket and start filling up the bathtub quicker? Here, let me explain. Well, you can start by going through past papers and just focusing on the questions that you really struggle with. Don't bother with the ones you already know how to do. Just focus on those ones you have no idea where to start to save yourself valuable time. You can also use resources like Save My Exams or your friend's notes just to find the summaries of key equations and solutions to those tricky questions. This means you're not having to start from scratch when time really matters. But how do you make sure you're actually learning and not just going through the motions? So, now that you've found your path, your next big problem is this. How do I make the information actually stick? Watching things like videos or reading revision notes without the information going in is like going around in a circle in your maze. You might feel like you're making progress, but we're not getting anywhere. Nothing's going in. So, what does active learning actually look like? It's all about engagement. You might be quizzing yourself on a topic or summarizing in your own words. You might even teach somebody else the topic. It's all about your brain actively working with that material. It's almost like you're leaving a breadcrumb trail in your maze that you can return to later. So, here's how you're going to do it. First off, watch a YouTube video on the topic. Now you've got to make notes on this and write them all down in one main document. The reason we're watching a video as opposed to reading notes is because the brain can remember images and visuals about 30% more effectively than it can just written words. Try writing down your notes by hand. Research has shown that writing down notes compared to typing or just reading is significantly better at activating our memory receptors in the brain. So write down those notes by hand, and once you've done that, test yourself on them. Cover them up and see if you can recall them. This is something called active recall, and it is that much better at moving things into our long-term memory. That means we can remember them whenever we want. Also, use flashcards. Just testing yourself on a few key terms, definitions, or equations is really going to help make sure you can remember them when the time comes. And finally, try teaching somebody else. One of the best ways to learn something is to teach it in simple terms to someone else. That can be a sibling, it can be a family member, a friend, or even your pet. Doing all of this means you're going to feel like you're making progress, not just walking around in circles in that maze. When we're involving multiple senses in our learning, so whether that's seeing, hearing, writing, or even speaking it aloud, we have a much better chance of committing it to long-term memory. This is why things like videos or teaching it to someone you know and writing down your notes by hand all improve your chances of that information sticking. All right, so now we're moving forward. How are we going to make sure that we don't run out of time or freeze under pressure in the exam room? It happens to the best of us. So just because you've learned those weaker points doesn't mean they're going to stay in your memory on the exam day. So in this next section, we're going to talk about stopping you from freezing in the exam under the pressure. So by now, you might be feeling the pressure. You've gone over your notes, you've practiced some topics, but you always run out of time when it comes to exam conditions. The main problem you're probably facing is that it feels like you don't have enough time to answer all the questions in an exam, especially when it comes to subjects like maths or science where there are questions with multiple parts. It's easy to get overwhelmed. Again, it's that age-old truth. It's not the amount of time you have, it's how you use that time. You might even be answering questions that you don't have to answer in your exam. So if you don't have a clear exam strategy, it's like fumbling around with the wrong key on a door that won't even budge. Now, imagine if you had the right key, the one that opens the door to answering all of your exam questions. It helps you master your exam technique, answer all the questions in time, and allow you to strategically manage time and focus on what really matters in your exam. Okay, here's the trick, and it's really simple. You get better at doing exam questions by doing exam questions. It's all about being specific, so save yourself all the time of reading through every revision note you think you need to read through and just do the questions. Once you've worked through those and you find something you struggle on, by all means go back to the theory. But the questions come first, they have to. This way, you're focusing on what is actually being tested, not wasting your time on details that might be irrelevant. Think of it like being in your maze and finding the door before you've even started. This is going to save you so much time just wandering around aimlessly. Number 1, start with the questions. These are the most important part. Do it without looking at the theory because you're not going to be able to do that in your exam conditions. You might surprise yourself by how well you do. Number 2, if you did struggle with a question, by all means, go back and look at the theory, read the revision notes, watch the videos, do the worked examples to find out where you went wrong. And finally, number 3, once you've done that, do even more exam questions, but this time under timed conditions. We're trying to be as specific as we possibly can be to exam conditions, and a timer is your key to that. This is especially important for subjects like maths or even sciences where timing is crucial in your exams. So, we're answering questions, but how do we know that we've covered everything when we first studied our GCSEs? How do you know that you didn't miss something in those early days? Well, that's what day 4 is all about. By day 4, you might start to realize that despite all of your progress, there are just some areas that you're really struggling with. Some areas where no matter how many questions you do, you always seem to get them wrong. It's like navigating the maze only to discover that some of the walls are starting to crack and they're almost threatening to cave in if you don't reinforce them. Now the issue here is that no matter how much revision you've done, there's always going to be some cracks, some gaps in your knowledge. Now, this could cause you problems later if you're not careful. These are the topics that always seem to trip you up when you're doing practice questions, or maybe you never understood the lesson in the first place. Filling in those cracks now is going to strengthen your foundations. So when you're faced with similar questions in the real exam, you've got a much better chance of doing well. Think of it like patching the walls in that maze so that they don't cave in on you. Once they're solid, the path straight ahead looks much clearer and easier to navigate. So how do you patch up those cracks? We're going to go back to those areas that have tripped you up and focus in especially on them. This might mean revisiting specific chapters in your textbook, it might be re-watching YouTube videos and making notes on them, and it might be going through loads of worked examples to make sure you really understand how those questions are answered. The goal here is to focus on what's still weak and turn it into a strength and make sure it is rock solid. Here's what you're going to do. First, we're going to revisit those tricky topics. Read the revision notes and make sure we understand the basics of what's going on. Number 2, we're going to test ourselves. Answer as many questions on the topic as you can. And third and finally, we're going to reinforce that with practice. Don't just do one question, don't just do 2, do as many as you can possibly find until it becomes a completely concrete strength of yours. Use resources like Save My Exams to focus on those areas of weakness and fill in the cracks with as many resources as possible. So, congratulations, you have reinforced those weak areas. But how do we make sure we are studying efficiently so that we don't burn out when it matters the most? So, it's day 5 and I know what you're thinking. The exam is getting really close. If I just put in 10 hours of revision today, surely I can fit it all in. Surely it's just a matter of cramming. But here's the problem. More time doesn't necessarily mean more progress. If you're not focused, those 10 hours are like walking in circles again. We're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to get tired. The real issue here is that you're focusing on time instead of intensity. When you're not fully engaged, long study sessions end up being surface level. We're just staring at our notes. We're not doing anything. It's like spending hours wandering around the maze, but we're not getting any closer to the exit because you're not taking the most direct path. Now imagine you're using intense and productive sessions instead of wasting hours wandering around. We're moving through the maze with real purpose, and by taking short and focused bursts of study, we're covering lots of ground in a much shorter time. So here's how you do it. We're going to apply something called Parkinson's technique. This is where we set ourselves lots of short deadlines for small tasks. This forces you to work intensely and focus on what really matters. Aim for blocks of 1 or 2 hours where you deep dive on the topics that are really important to you. Now, you've probably heard of the Pomodoro technique. Heck, even I talk about it. But here's the issue. Your exam does not give you 25 minutes of focus and then a 5-minute break. And remember, we're focusing on being specific to exam conditions. So work in 1 or 2 hour blocks to replicate the situation you're going to be in on the big day. So set yourself a timer equal to the length of your exam. Pick out a past paper and do it from start to finish under exam conditions. That means no phone, no chatting to anybody, and having all of the equipment that you're going to have in your exam to hand. This way, you're training your brain to work under those stressful exam conditions for long periods of time. So, you're going to study in short and very focused bursts of 1 or 2 hours. We're going to simulate exam conditions. That means print out your periodic table or whatever materials you're going to be given in the exam and get your calculator out and your nice pens and pencils. And third and finally, absolutely no distractions. If you need to tell people at home that you're going to be doing that, so be it. Absolutely no phones, don't talk to anyone. Imagine you are in your exam. So, now that you are speeding through your revision, how are we going to wrap things up and prepare for your exam the night before? By day 6, you've put in the hard work, you've completed all the steps in the previous days, but this is where a lot of students still manage to trip themselves up by cramming everything in at the last minute. It's like seeing the exit to the maze and sprinting towards it as fast as you can, only to collapse from exhaustion just before that finish line. The truth is, trying to cram everything in the night before is counterproductive. I know you've heard that before, but it's true. Your brain needs time to consolidate what you've learned. It needs to rest. And overloading it at the last minute is only going to make things worse. Instead, spend today reviewing key points one last time. Look at the things that you struggled with before, summarize them, and just take a glance over. Think of it as pacing yourself towards the exit of the maze. You've come this far and now you need to gather your energy before the final push. All right, this is the part of most videos where they tell you to get a good night's sleep before the exam, feel well rested and recovered for the big day. And they are absolutely correct. That would be great. However, if we're being honest, it's your resits, you're going to be stressed. You're going to be thinking about all those topics that you don't completely understand or those questions that you didn't get right in practice. You're probably going to be lying awake. What I'd recommend, instead of getting your phone out and scrolling until 4 AM and then feeling terrible about yourself, get up out of bed, change of environment, and look at those notes that you're thinking about. You'll probably find this really boring, and hopefully you'll start to get tired, and bed's going to seem much more appealing than looking at your revision notes. So, on day 6, you should review all of the key areas that you've struggled with in the past and just look at them one last time. Don't look at everything. You should try and get a good amount of sleep. Aim for over 7 hours. And finally, if that does not come easily, get out of bed, have a look at some revision notes, bore yourself to sleep if you have to. One last final thing, top tip. Try not to go too carb heavy on your breakfast on the morning of your exam. So put the Cheerios to one side. This can risk you having a sugar crash in your exam, and that's really not what you want when you're already stressed. Try to go for healthy natural fats in things like avocado and protein in things like salmon and eggs. So, now that you've got your map to success, why not check out one other thing? Here's what the top 1% of students do to make sure that they are the very best achievers. Find out what the best habits and tips are from the very best. The clock doesn't control you anymore. You're ready. Now, walk into that exam with confidence.